Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his brow as he stared at the twisted wreckage of the transport ship scattered across the jungle floor. Steam rose from the metal hulk where coolant mixed with the humid air of Kepler 442b. Around him, the survivors of the diplomatic mission sat in small groups, their faces painted with shock and growing desperation. The crash had been sudden. One moment they were descending toward the neutral meeting point between human and alien territories. The next, they were plummeting through the dense canopy of an uncharted jungle. Of the 47 beings aboard, 32 had survived. Humans made up barely a third of the survivors. The rest were a mix of species from the Galactic Council. The emergency rations are ruined, announced Dr. Vexhai, the Zentorian expedition leader. Her scaled hands held up what remained of their food supplies, a soggy, moldy mess that had been contaminated when the storage compartments flooded during the crash. The preservation units failed when we lost main power. A collective groan rose from the group. The Ketheri delegation clicked their mandibles nervously, while the ethereal luminary dimmed their natural glow in distress. Each species had different dietary requirements, and their specialized nutrition packs were now completely inedible. "How long until rescue?" asked Ambassador Telvar, the senior Zentorian diplomat. His reptilian features were creased with worry. Captain Rodriguez, the human pilot who had managed to bring them down with minimal casualties, checked his emergency beacon. "At least 2 weeks, maybe 3. We're way off course from the crash. The beacon is transmitting, but we're in a dead zone for faster-than-light communication." The aliens exchanged glances filled with barely concealed panic. Most of their species had evolved beyond the need to forage or hunt for food. Their civilizations had been spacefaring for millennia, relying on perfectly calibrated nutrition supplements and synthesized meals. Marcus, who served as the human cultural attaché, noticed something the others had missed. While the aliens despaired over their ruined supplies, his nose had picked up something else entirely. The air carried the scent of smoke, not from their crash, but from cooking fires. There were indigenous people nearby. "We need to establish contact with the locals," Marcus suggested, standing up from where he'd been examining some native fruits. "They might be willing to trade or help us." Dr. Vexahai's scales rippled with skepticism. "Primitive societies rarely have surplus food, especially not in quantities sufficient for our needs, and we have little to trade with them. Besides," added Takor, a hulking Drachmani warrior whose species prided itself on technological superiority, "what could savages possibly know about proper nutrition? We require specific nutrient balances that their crude foods cannot provide." Marcus bit back his irritation. It was typical of the Council species to look down on any civilization that hadn't reached the stars. They measured intelligence and worth solely by technological advancement, never considering that survival skills might be just as valuable. "I'm going to scout the area," Marcus announced. "Maybe I can learn something useful." Most of the aliens seemed content to wait in the relative safety of the crash site, hoping their technology would somehow provide a solution. Only Sarah Kim, the other human survivor and a xenobiologist, chose to accompany Marcus into the jungle. They followed the scent of smoke through dense undergrowth, past towering trees whose canopy blocked out most of the alien sun's light. Strange calls echoed through the forest, some musical, others guttural. Sarah cataloged each new plant and insect they encountered, while Marcus focused on signs of habitation. After an hour of careful movement, they discovered a village nestled in a natural clearing beside a winding river. The inhabitants were humanoid, but clearly adapted to their jungle environment. They stood about 7 feet tall with elongated limbs and mottled green skin that provided natural camouflage. Most striking were their large, multifaceted eyes that could track movement in multiple directions simultaneously. "Ketheri-like," Sarah whispered, noting their insectoid features, but completely different evolutionary path. The villagers had noticed them as well. Several emerged from elaborately woven shelters, carrying what appeared to be hunting spears. However, their posture suggested curiosity rather than hostility. One of them, distinguished by intricate scarification and feathers woven into her hair, approached slowly. Marcus raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal, peaceful gesture. The female, he assumed she was female based on her smaller stature and the deference shown by others, chirped something in their musical language. Communication proved challenging but not impossible. Through gestures, simple drawings in the dirt, and patient repetition, Marcus and Sarah managed to convey that they were travelers whose skyboat had crashed. The villagers, led by the scarred female who seemed to be their chief or shaman, showed immediate understanding. What impressed Marcus most was their immediate offer of aid. Without hesitation, they invited the humans to their village and began preparing food. The meal was simple but nourishing: roasted tubers, grilled fish from the river, and a variety of fruits and vegetables Marcus didn't recognize but found surprisingly palatable. More importantly, Marcus observed their food preservation methods. Near the village center stood a structure unlike their other buildings, an enclosed hut with vents near the top, from which thin streams of smoke constantly emerged. Inside, racks held strips of meat, fish, and sliced vegetables, all slowly curing in the aromatic smoke. "It's a smokehouse," Sarah breathed in amazement. "They're using controlled smoke to preserve food for long-term storage." The process was elegant in its simplicity. Green wood created cool, dense smoke that dried and flavored the food while preventing spoilage. The villagers had perfected techniques that could preserve meat for months without any technology beyond fire and patience. Marcus's mind raced with possibilities. Here was a solution that required no power cells, no complex machinery, and no rare elements, just knowledge, skill, and the raw materials that surrounded them in abundance. When they returned to the crash site near sunset, they found the situation had deteriorated. Several aliens were showing signs of hunger-induced stress. The Cathari delegation was rationing their water, while the Luminari were growing visibly dimmer as their energy reserves depleted. "Well," Dr. Vexhai demanded, "did you find anything useful, or was this just an exercise in primitive tourism?" Marcus smiled, thinking of the generous villagers who had shared their meal without asking for anything in return. "I found exactly what we need," he said. "But first, we're going to have to change how we think about survival." The next morning brought new challenges and deepening divisions among the survivors. Several aliens had spent the night in digestive distress after attempting to eat some of the native fruits Marcus had brought back. Dr. Vexhai used this as evidence that local food sources were unsuitable for their delicate alien physiologies. "You see?" she hissed, her scales shifting to an angry orange hue. "Our metabolisms are precisely calibrated. We cannot simply consume random organic matter like primitives." Tikor, the Drachmani warrior, was in worse shape than the others. His species required a specific protein complex found only in synthesized supplements. Without it, his muscular frame was already beginning to show signs of deterioration. "I will not eat dirt and leaves," he growled, his voice weak but defiant. Marcus watched the deteriorating situation with growing concern. The aliens' technological dependence had made them incredibly vulnerable in this most basic aspect of survival. They had traded adaptability for efficiency, and now that trade was potentially fatal. "We need to work together," Marcus said, addressing the group that had gathered around the crashed ship's emergency beacon. "I've made contact with the local inhabitants. They're willing to help us, but we need to approach this systematically." "Help us how?" asked Ambassador Telvar. "By offering us the same indigestible plant matter that has already made several of us ill?" Sarah stepped forward, her xenobiologist training allowing her to bridge the gap between scientific skepticism and practical necessity. "The digestive distress was expected," she explained. "Your gut bacteria aren't adapted to process these new food sources. But that can be changed with gradual introduction and the right preparation methods." She pulled out her portable scanner, one of the few pieces of technology that had survived the crash intact. "I've been analyzing the local flora and fauna. The basic nutritional building blocks are all there: proteins, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, and minerals. The challenge is making them bioavailable for your specific physiologies." The luminary representative, Shinnemoth, flickered with faint hope. "You believe adaptation is possible?" "I know it is," Sarah replied confidently. "But it requires patience and trust in methods that might seem primitive by your standards." Tikor snorted with contempt. "Primitive methods for primitive minds. My species conquered 3 star systems through superior technology, not by grubbing in the dirt for roots." Marcus felt his patience wearing thin. The Drachmani's arrogance was typical of the military caste that dominated their society. They saw any sign of weakness or adaptation as beneath their dignity, even when their lives depended on it. "Your superior technology is scattered in pieces across half a mile of jungle floor," Marcus replied calmly. Right now, what we need is superior knowledge of how to survive without it. He turned to address the entire group. I'm going back to the village. Anyone who wants to learn how to actually solve our problem is welcome to come with me. Anyone who wants to wait here for their pride to feed them can do that too. To his surprise, several aliens chose to follow him. She and Moth led the Luminari delegation, their natural curiosity overcoming their fear. Two young Kethari scientists, intrigued by Sarah's biological analysis, also joined the expedition. Even one of the Zentaurian diplomats, a junior ambassador named Kessitel who seemed less rigid than her superiors, decided to observe. The walk to the village gave Marcus time to explain what he had observed during his previous visit. These people have been living in harmony with their environment for thousands of years, he said as they navigated the jungle paths. They've developed sustainable methods for extracting maximum nutrition from their ecosystem without depleting it. Shine Moth pulsed with genuine interest. Their social structure suggests high intelligence despite their technological level. The Luminari respect wisdom over mere tool-making ability. When they reached the village, the scarred leader, who Marcus had begun thinking of as the chief, greeted them warmly. Through the improved communication system they had developed using Sarah's translation protocols, she introduced herself with a name that roughly translated to "seeks the hidden path." The chief seemed delighted to have multiple species to teach. She guided them through the village, showing them various food preparation techniques that had been perfected over generations. Most impressive was her demonstration of the Smokehouse operation. The structure was larger than Marcus had initially realized, with multiple chambers designed for different preservation methods. One section used hot smoke for quick cooking and flavoring. Another used cool smoke for long-term preservation. A third chamber employed a combination of smoke and natural fermentation to create what appeared to be a form of aged protein that was both nutritious and flavorful. Fascinating, whispered one of the Kethari scientists, whose compound eyes were perfectly adapted to observe the subtle color changes in the curing meat. They're using controlled bacterial cultures in combination with chemical compounds from specific wood types. It's biotechnology without machinery. Sarah was busy taking readings with her scanner. The smoke contains natural preservatives, aldehydes, phenols, and organic acids that prevent harmful bacterial growth while encouraging beneficial fermentation. It's incredibly sophisticated. The chief noticed their scientific instruments and approached Sarah with obvious interest. Through gestures and basic word exchanges, she managed to convey that her people had always been curious about the sky people and their tools. In return, she offered to teach them the secrets of smoke preservation. What followed was one of the most remarkable cultural exchanges Marcus had ever witnessed. The chief began by explaining how different types of wood created different flavors and preservation qualities. Sarah translated this into biochemical terms that the aliens could understand, while Marcus worked to identify Earth analogs for the processes. The Kethari scientists were particularly adept at understanding the timing and temperature controls involved. Their species had always excelled at precise environmental management, and they quickly grasped how the villagers manipulated airflow and fuel selection to achieve specific results. Shine Moth, representing a species that communicated partly through controlled light emissions, proved surprisingly good at monitoring the subtle visual cues that indicated when food had reached optimal preservation states. Even young Kestel contributed, her diplomatic training helping her understand the social protocols that governed food sharing and preservation responsibilities within the village. By midday, they had established a working system. The chief provided raw materials and expertise, while the aliens contributed their analytical tools and scientific perspective. Together, they began preparing the first batch of preserved food, specifically designed for alien metabolisms. The process would take several days to complete, but Marcus could already see hope returning to their faces. More importantly, he noticed something else happening. The rigid hierarchies and species-based prejudices that had dominated their interactions were beginning to break down. Working side by side with the villagers, learning skills that their advanced civilizations had forgotten, the aliens were rediscovering something their technological dependency had cost them: the ability to adapt and survive using nothing but intelligence, cooperation, and hard work. When they returned to the crash site that evening, carrying samples of properly prepared local foods and detailed plans for building their own smokehouse, They found the remaining survivors in worse condition than before. Several more aliens had fallen ill from hunger and stress, while others had retreated into fatalistic depression. Dr. Vexahai looked at their small group with obvious disdain. "I see you've returned from your primitive games. Perhaps now you're ready to focus on serious solutions?" Marcus smiled and began unpacking the preserved foods they had prepared. "Actually," he said, "we brought back the only solution that matters. The question is whether you're ready to learn it." The evening demonstration of properly prepared alien-compatible foods created a sharp divide in the camp. Half the survivors gathered around Marcus and Sarah as they explained the smoking and preservation process, while the other half maintained skeptical distance, led by Dr. Vexhai and Tikor. "This is exactly the kind of primitive thinking that keeps species trapped on single worlds," Dr. Vexhai declared, her scales shifting to deep purple with indignation. "We didn't evolve beyond such crude methods to regress when faced with minor setbacks." Tikor, despite his visibly weakening condition, nodded agreement. "The Drachmani Empire spans 7 systems because we never compromised our standards. We will not begin eating like savages now." Marcus noticed that several of the other aliens were wavering. The social pressure from their senior members was strong, but hunger was stronger. 3 more Cathari had joined the learning group, drawn by their species' natural curiosity about biotechnological processes. The remaining Luminari also showed interest, their energy-based physiology making them more adaptable to new food sources than some of the others. "Look," Marcus said, addressing the entire group, "nobody's asking you to abandon your civilizations, but right now your civilizations aren't here to help you. What's here is knowledge that can keep you alive until rescue arrives." He gestured toward the samples of preserved food they had prepared. "Sarah's scanner confirms these contain all the essential nutrients your species need, processed in ways that make them digestible for your specific physiologies. This isn't about regression, it's about adaptation." Ambassador Telvar, who had been quiet during the argument, finally spoke up. "Perhaps we should consider a compromise. Those who wish to experiment with these methods may do so, while others await conventional rescue." It was a diplomatic solution that satisfied no one completely but allowed both factions to save face. Marcus accepted it readily, knowing that hunger would eventually drive more converts to their approach. The next morning, Marcus led a larger group back to the village. Word had spread among the aliens about the successful food preparation, and even some of Dr. Vexhai's supporters were beginning to reconsider their positions. The group now included 12 aliens representing all species except the most stubborn Drachmani. Seeks the Hidden Path greeted them with obvious pleasure. Through their improved communication system, she explained that her people had been discussing the Sky People's visit with great excitement. The concept of sharing knowledge with beings from other worlds appealed to their naturally collaborative culture. What Marcus discovered that day changed his understanding of both the villagers and the preservation process. The Smokehouse wasn't just a food storage system. It was the center of the village's entire social and economic structure. The chief led them through a complex demonstration that revealed the true sophistication of their methods. Different foods required different preparation rituals, timing, and wood combinations. But more than that, the process was deeply integrated with their social hierarchy and resource management systems. "Watch carefully," the chief said through their translation system, as she began selecting specific pieces of wood. "The burning wood must match the meat animal. Forest runners need sweet smoke wood, while water swimmers need bitter smoke wood." Sarah's scanner revealed why this mattered. Different proteins required different chemical environments for optimal preservation. The villagers had empirically discovered what took human food science centuries to understand, that the molecular composition of smoke could be precisely controlled to maximize preservation and nutritional value for specific food types. The Cathari scientists were fascinated. Their compound eyes could perceive the subtle color changes in the smoke that indicated optimal chemical composition. "This is not primitive," one of them clicked excitedly. "This is advanced biotechnology that requires no external power source." Shinnemoth pulsed with growing enthusiasm. "The energy efficiency is remarkable. The Luminary could adapt these methods for use on energy-poor worlds." But it was Kessatel, the young Zentorian diplomat, who made the most crucial observation. "The social structure," she said quietly to Marcus. "Look how they organize the preservation work. Marcus followed her gaze and realized she was right. The smokehouse operation wasn't run by a single individual or family group. Instead, different villagers took responsibility for different aspects of the process based on their skills and knowledge. Some specialized in wood selection, others in timing and temperature control, still others in the final preparation of preserved foods. It's a cooperative system, Marcus realized. No one person knows everything, but together they maintain knowledge that keeps the entire community fed year-round. This insight proved crucial when they returned to the crash site and began planning their own preservation facility. The aliens' initial instinct was to assign the project to their most technically skilled individuals, but Marcus insisted they follow the village model of distributed expertise. The result was remarkable. The Cathari scientists became experts in temperature and airflow management, their analytical minds perfect for monitoring the precise conditions needed for optimal preservation. The Luminari took charge of timing and process coordination, their energy-based perception allowing them to detect subtle changes in the preservation process that others missed. The Zentorian diplomats, with their talent for negotiation and resource allocation, became the project managers, ensuring that different groups worked together efficiently. Even some of the more flexible members of Dr. Vexhai's faction began contributing their specialized knowledge. The construction took 3 days of intensive work. Using salvaged materials from the crash site combined with natural resources from the jungle, they built a smokehouse that would have impressed the village engineers. The aliens' advanced understanding of material science, combined with the villagers' empirical knowledge, created something that was both primitive and sophisticated. Dr. Vexhai watched the construction with barely concealed frustration. Her authority was eroding as more survivors joined the preservation project. Several members of her own Zentorian delegation had defected, drawn by both hunger and the intellectual challenge of adapting alien methods to their needs. "This is temporary madness," she declared during one of their evening meetings. "When rescue arrives, history will judge us harshly for abandoning our principles." Tikor was in worse condition. His refusal to eat anything but synthesized rations was taking a severe toll on his massive frame. The other Drachmani were beginning to worry about their leader's health, but none dared challenge his stubborn pride directly. Marcus realized that the situation was about more than food preservation. It had become a fundamental question about the nature of intelligence, adaptation, and survival. The aliens who embraced the new methods weren't just learning to preserve food. They were rediscovering capabilities their species had forgotten. On the third evening, as smoke began rising from their completed smokehouse, Marcus stood with Seeks the Hidden Path at the edge of the village. Through gestures and broken words, she managed to convey something that struck him as profoundly important. "Sky people think machines make them strong," she said slowly, "but machines break. Knowledge of living, knowledge of surviving, that never breaks." As if to emphasize her point, their emergency beacon chose that moment to emit a weak electronic squeal before falling silent. Another piece of their advanced technology had failed, leaving them more dependent than ever on the primitive methods that were keeping them alive. Marcus looked back at the camp, where aliens from 4 different species were working together to prepare their first batch of preserved food. They were learning something that their civilizations had forgotten in their rush toward technological perfection. Sometimes the most advanced solution was also the simplest one, and sometimes survival required the wisdom to know the difference. The first harvest from their smokehouse exceeded everyone's expectations. After 5 days of careful preparation, they had produced enough preserved food to feed the entire survivor group for weeks. More importantly, Sarah's nutritional analysis confirmed that the smoking process had actually enhanced the bioavailability of key nutrients for each species. "Remarkable," she announced to the gathered aliens, her scanner displaying complex molecular breakdowns. "The controlled fermentation during smoking has broken down complex proteins into amino acid chains that your digestive systems can process more efficiently than even your original rations." The implications were staggering. Not only had they solved their immediate survival crisis, but they had potentially discovered food preparation methods that were superior to their advanced civilization's synthesized nutrition systems. Shin Moth pulsed with excitement. "The Luminary Council must learn of this. Our exploration fleets often face supply shortages on long-range missions. This knowledge could save countless lives. The Cathari scientists were equally enthusiastic. Their compound eyes had become expert at reading the subtle color changes that indicated optimal preservation levels. The efficiency is extraordinary, one of them clicked. No energy input except readily available biomass, yet the output rivals our most advanced food synthesis laboratories. Even the moderate members of Dr. Vexhai's faction were beginning to reconsider their positions. The tangible success of the preservation project was hard to argue against, especially when their emergency supplies continued to dwindle and malfunction. However, the growing success of the human-led initiative only deepened the divisions in the camp. Dr. Vexhai had consolidated her remaining supporters into what Marcus had begun thinking of as the purest faction, aliens who refused to compromise their technological superiority for any reason. Takor's condition had become critical. The massive Drachmani warrior was clearly suffering from severe protein deficiency, his once impressive physique now visibly wasted. Yet his pride prevented him from accepting help from what he considered inferior methods. "I would rather die as a true Drachmani than live as a primitive," he declared, when Marcus approached him with a specially prepared protein supplement derived from local sources. "My ancestors conquered the Vortan Nebula without resorting to such degrading measures." Marcus found Tikor's attitude both frustrating and tragic. The Drachmani's military culture had created warriors of incredible discipline and courage, but that same culture was now literally killing him. The refusal to adapt had become a form of slow suicide. "Your ancestors conquered the nebula because they were smart enough to use whatever tools and methods gave them an advantage," Marcus replied. "Right now, this food is the best tool available to keep you strong enough to see your empire again." Tikor turned away without responding, but Marcus noticed that some of the other Drachmani were listening. Their leader's deteriorating condition was affecting their morale, and they were beginning to question the wisdom of his rigid stance. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Kestel, the young Zentorian diplomat, had been spending increasing amounts of time at the village, learning advanced preservation techniques from Seeks the Hidden Path. During one of these sessions, she made a discovery that changed everything. "Marcus, you need to see this," she called, her scales bright with excitement. She had been working with the chief to develop a preservation method specifically designed for Drachmani physiology, using Sarah's detailed analysis of their nutritional requirements. What they had created was a form of preserved meat that not only met Tikor's dietary needs but actually exceeded the nutritional density of his original military rations. The smoking process had concentrated the essential proteins while breaking them down into forms that his digestive system could absorb with maximum efficiency. More importantly, Kesetel had learned the cultural significance of food preparation in Drachmani society. "It's not just about nutrition," she explained. "In their military tradition, refusing food prepared by an ally is a grave insult. But accepting food prepared specifically to honor your strength and status is a sign of respect." The chief had instinctively understood this cultural dynamic and had prepared the Drachmani supplements using methods that honored their warrior traditions. The preservation process itself had been conducted with the ceremony and precision that military protocols demanded. When Marcus and Kestel presented the specially prepared food to Tikor, they framed it not as primitive survival rations but as a tribute to Drachmani's strength, prepared by a fellow warrior culture. The chief herself accompanied them, wearing ceremonial decorations that marked her as a leader and warrior in her own right. Tikor studied the preserved meat for a long moment, his predator's instincts recognizing the quality of what he was being offered. When he finally tasted it, his expression changed from suspicion to surprise to grudging respect. "This is acceptable," he admitted, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "The Sky Woman understands the ways of warriors." The chief nodded gravely and, through their translation system, conveyed that she recognized Tikor as a great hunter whose skills had been temporarily thwarted by circumstances beyond his control. In her culture, accepting help from fellow hunters was not weakness but wisdom. Tikor's acceptance of the preserved food had immediate ripple effects throughout the camp. If the proud Drachmani leader could acknowledge the value of these methods, then other aliens felt free to do the same. Within hours, even some of Dr. Vexhai's most loyal supporters were quietly approaching the Smokehouse to request their own specially prepared supplements. Dr. Vexhai herself remained defiant, But her isolation was becoming increasingly obvious. Her faction had dwindled to a handful of die-hard purists, who seemed more concerned with maintaining ideological purity than with practical survival. "This is exactly how civilizations fall," she declared during one of their evening meetings. "First you compromise your principles for convenience, then you abandon them entirely for comfort. Soon you're no different from the primitives you once ruled." Marcus listened to her speech with growing sadness. Dr. Vexhai was clearly intelligent and dedicated, but her intelligence had been trapped within rigid frameworks that prevented adaptation. She saw change as defeat rather than evolution. The turning point came when the villagers invited the survivors to participate in their harvest celebration. The timing was perfect. Their preserves had reached optimal maturity and the village's own food stores were at their seasonal peak. Seeks the Hidden Path explained that sharing abundance was one of their most important traditions. The celebration was unlike anything the aliens had experienced. Instead of the formal ceremonies that dominated their respective cultures, the village gathering was both joyous and practical. Everyone contributed to the preparation of communal meals, from the youngest children to the elders. Marcus watched in fascination as aliens, who had never touched their own food before, found themselves helping to prepare elaborate feasts using techniques they had learned over the past weeks. Cathari scientists worked alongside Luminari diplomats to manage cooking fires, while Xantorian officials learned traditional songs that were sung during food preparation. The most remarkable moment came when Takor, now noticeably recovered from his nutritional crisis, approached the chief with a formal gesture of respect. Through the translation system, he requested permission to learn her people's hunting techniques, explaining that a true warrior always sought to improve their skills. The chief's response was immediate and enthusiastic. She had noticed Takor's obvious combat experience and had been hoping for an opportunity to exchange knowledge. What followed was an impromptu demonstration of hunting and food acquisition methods that left both cultures impressed with each other's expertise. As the celebration continued into the evening, Marcus realized they had achieved something far more significant than mere survival. They had created a genuine cultural exchange that was enriching both groups. The aliens were learning practical skills their civilizations had forgotten, while the villagers were gaining new perspectives on their traditional methods. Even Dr. Vexhai, watching from the edge of the gathering, seemed affected by the obvious success of the collaboration. She maintained her distance, but Marcus caught her studying the preservation techniques with obvious scientific interest. The real test would come in the morning, when they would need to decide whether to maintain their cooperative approach or return to the old divisions. But for tonight at least, the barriers between primitive and advanced, alien and indigenous, had temporarily dissolved into simple appreciation for shared knowledge and mutual survival. The morning after the harvest celebration brought unexpected challenges that tested their newfound cooperation in ways none of them had anticipated. Marcus awoke to find Seeks the Hidden Path and several village elders waiting at their camp, their expressions grave with concern. Through their improved translation system, the chief explained that dangerous storm season was approaching. The village's weather readers had detected atmospheric patterns that indicated severe weather would arrive within days. Their people needed to complete emergency preparations, which meant the extensive food-sharing arrangement with the survivors would have to be temporarily suspended. "We not abandon Sky People," the chief assured them through translated clicks and whistles. "But we must protect our young ones first. Storm season kills many if preparation not complete." Dr. Vexhai saw this development as vindication of her position. "Exactly as I predicted," she announced to the gathered survivors. "Primitive societies cannot maintain reliable resource allocation. This is why advanced civilizations develop technological solutions rather than depending on unreliable natural systems." Her criticism stung because it contained just enough truth to be genuinely worrying. The survivors had grown dependent on the village's assistance, and now they would need to demonstrate that they had truly learned sustainable survival methods rather than just benefiting temporarily from alien charity. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. The human approach to this crisis had created hope and progress, but it had also created expectations. If they failed now, it wouldn't just mean hunger and privation. It would validate every alien prejudice about primitive methods being unreliable. "We adapt," he announced firmly. "We've learned the principles. Now we prove we can apply them independently." Takor, whose recovery had been dramatic since accepting proper nutrition, stepped forward with surprising authority. "The human speaks wisdom," he declared in his newly strong voice. "Warriors do not depend on others for survival. We learn, we adapt, we overcome." His transformation from stubborn opponent to ally had been one of the most remarkable changes Marcus had witnessed. The Drachmani's military discipline, once an obstacle to cooperation, had become an asset for implementing systematic survival strategies. Sarah immediately began taking inventory of their resources and capabilities. Her scientific analysis had identified dozens of local plant and animal species suitable for preservation, and their smokehouse was now fully operational. The question was whether they could gather and process enough food to sustain themselves through the approaching storm season. "The math is challenging, but not impossible," she reported, after running calculations on her scanner. "We need approximately 15% more preserved food than our current production rate can support. But that assumes we maintain current efficiency levels while expanding our operation." The solution required the kind of coordinated effort that their respective cultures had rarely attempted across species lines. Marcus proposed dividing their group into specialized teams, each focusing on different aspects of the food acquisition and preservation process. The Cathari scientists, with their analytical precision, took charge of monitoring and optimizing the smoking process itself. Their compound eyes could detect subtle variations in smoke density and color that indicated when adjustments were needed. Under their management, the smokehouse's efficiency improved by nearly 20% within the first day. The Luminari, whose energy-based perception allowed them to work effectively during the dim twilight hours, became the night shift supervisors. Their ability to detect thermal variations made them perfect for maintaining optimal temperatures during the long preservation cycles that ran continuously. The Zentaurian diplomats, led by the increasingly confident Kestel, took responsibility for resource allocation and coordination between teams. Their natural talent for negotiation and planning helped optimize workflow and prevent conflicts over limited supplies. Even the remaining members of Dr. Vexai's faction found themselves drawn into essential roles. Their technical knowledge proved valuable for improving tools and developing more efficient processing methods using salvaged equipment. From the crash site, Takor and the other Drachmani became the primary hunting and gathering team. Their military training translated surprisingly well to organized resource acquisition, and their newfound appreciation for indigenous techniques made them eager students of the chief's advanced hunting methods. The most challenging aspect was scaling up their preservation capacity fast enough to meet their needs. The original smokehouse, while effective, simply wasn't large enough to process the volume of food they required. They needed to expand quickly without compromising quality or safety. Marcus found the solution by combining human engineering principles with alien technological advantages and indigenous expertise. The Cathari scientists calculated optimal airflow patterns, while Sarah identified the best local materials for construction. The village provided essential knowledge about seasonal variations in wood quality and smoke density requirements. Working around the clock, they constructed 2 additional preservation units, each designed for specific types of food processing. One specialized in quick smoking techniques for immediate consumption, while the other focused on long-term preservation methods that would sustain them through extended periods of scarcity. The expansion project required every survivor to contribute, regardless of their previous position on the technological versus primitive divide. Even Dr. Vexai found herself analyzing soil composition to determine optimal foundation placement for the new smokehouses. "I want it clearly understood," she announced, while helping to mix clay and fibrous materials for construction, "that this is purely a temporary expedient necessitated by circumstances beyond our control." Marcus smiled, recognizing that her need to maintain dignity was allowing her to contribute without admitting she had been wrong. Sometimes the best diplomatic solution was to give people a face-saving way to change their minds. The real breakthrough came when they discovered that their expanded operation was actually producing higher quality preserved foods than anything they had achieved before. The combination of alien analytical capabilities, human adaptability, and indigenous wisdom had created preservation techniques that exceeded the performance of any single approach. Sarah's scanner readings showed nutritional density levels that surpassed even their original ship rations. The careful monitoring and optimization had eliminated waste and maximized the beneficial effects of the smoking process. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. More importantly, they were developing genuinely innovative methods that none of their respective cultures had discovered independently. The Cathari's precise environmental control combined with the chief's empirical knowledge had created smoking techniques that could be adapted for use on dozens of different worlds. The luminaries' energy management principles, applied to heat regulation during preservation, had reduced processing time while improving quality. The Zentorian gift for systematic organization had streamlined workflow in ways that could revolutionize food production across multiple species. T-Corps' military logistics experience had optimized resource allocation and scheduling, ensuring maximum efficiency with minimum waste. Even the human tendency toward creative problem-solving had contributed unique solutions that surprised their alien colleagues. As the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and the first strong winds began rattling their shelters, Marcus realized they had accomplished something unprecedented. They hadn't just solved their immediate survival crisis, they had created a genuinely collaborative system that made everyone stronger than they could have been alone. Dr. Vexhai, working alongside aliens she had previously dismissed as inferior, was learning that intelligence came in many forms. T-Corps, accepting techniques from people he had once considered primitive, was discovering that true strength required the wisdom to recognize valuable knowledge regardless of its source. The approaching storm would test everything they had built, but Marcus felt confident they would survive it. More than that, they would emerge stronger, wiser, and more united than any of them had thought possible when their ship first crashed in this alien jungle. The storm arrived with a fury that humbled even the most technologically advanced survivors. Winds that would have registered as hurricane force on Earth turned the jungle canopy into a writhing mass of debris and destruction. Rain fell not in drops but in sheets, turning the ground into muddy rivers that threatened to wash away everything in their path. Marcus huddled with the other survivors in their reinforced shelters, listening to the chaos outside while monitoring their precious food stores. The 3 smokehouses had been sealed and secured according to the chief's detailed instructions, but the true test would come when the storm passed and they could assess the damage. The village had withdrawn to their own storm shelters, leaving the aliens to face their first major crisis as a truly independent group. It was, Marcus realized, exactly the kind of trial that would either prove their adaptability or expose the fundamental weaknesses in their approach. Dr. Vexhai maintained her skeptical stance even as the storm raged around them. "This is precisely why advanced civilizations develop climate-controlled environments," she muttered, her scales shifting nervously with each thunderclap. Depending on uncontrollable natural forces inevitably leads to disaster. "The forces aren't uncontrollable," Sarah replied, checking her environmental scanner for the 100th time. "They're just large-scale. The villagers have been managing storm season for thousands of years. We need to trust their methods and our preparation." T-Corps, now fully recovered and serving as the group's unofficial military coordinator, was monitoring their defensive preparations with professional competence. "The smokehouse foundations are solid," he reported. "The drainage systems are functioning properly. If our preservation units survive this storm, they will survive anything." The Cathari scientists had spent the last hours before the storm's arrival making detailed measurements of temperature and humidity levels inside their sealed preservation chambers. Their data suggested that the smoking process would continue effectively even during the extreme weather, possibly even benefiting from the increased humidity that would slow moisture loss. Shine Moth and the other luminary had dimmed their natural glow to conserve energy, but their enhanced perception allowed them to monitor structural integrity even in the darkness of the storm. They reported that the buildings were holding well under the extreme wind pressure. The first real crisis came on the storm's second day, when one of the newer preservation units began showing signs of moisture infiltration. Water was seeping through gaps in the construction that hadn't been apparent during fair weather testing. "We're losing the entire batch of preserved proteins," announced one of the Cathari scientists, their mandibles clicking with distress. "The humidity levels are rising beyond acceptable parameters." Marcus felt his heart sink. That particular smokehouse contained most of their long-term protein reserves, the carefully prepared foods that were supposed to sustain them through the weeks following the storm. Losing it would force them back to dangerous dependence on uncertain fresh food sources. "Can we repair the damage?" he asked, already knowing the answer. The storm was too violent to allow external construction work, and they lacked the materials for major structural modifications. "Not repair," Takor said thoughtfully. "Adapt." The Drakmani warrior had learned more than just hunting techniques from Seeks the Hidden Path. He had absorbed some of their philosophical approach to problem-solving, the idea that challenges should be met with creative adaptation rather than brute force resistance. Working together despite the chaos outside, they developed an emergency solution that none of them could have conceived individually. The Luminary used their energy manipulation abilities to create localized heat sources that could be precisely controlled. The Cathari scientists calculated optimal air circulation patterns that would work within the compromised structure. The Zentorian diplomats coordinated resource allocation to minimize disruption to the other preservation units. Sarah provided the biological expertise needed to modify their preservation process for the changed conditions, while Marcus contributed the human talent for improvisation under pressure. Together, they transformed what could have been a devastating failure into an opportunity to develop even more effective techniques. The modified preservation method actually proved superior in several ways. The controlled humidity levels created by their emergency repairs allowed for more precise fermentation control. The enhanced air circulation improved smoke distribution throughout the chamber. The result was preserved food with better flavor and longer storage life than their original methods had achieved. By the storm's third day, they weren't just surviving the crisis, they were using it to improve their capabilities. The extreme conditions had forced them to develop innovations that wouldn't have been possible under normal circumstances. Dr. Vexhai found herself taking an increasingly active role in the adaptation efforts. Her technical knowledge proved essential for understanding how environmental changes affected their preservation chemistry. Despite her continued complaints about primitive methods, she was clearly intellectually engaged with the problem-solving process. "I maintain that this entire situation could have been avoided with proper technological preparation," she insisted, while helping to calibrate humidity levels in the modified smokehouse. "However, I admit that the biochemical processes involved are unexpectedly sophisticated." Marcus recognized this as the closest thing to an admission of error he was likely to get from the proud Zentorian scientist. Her grudging respect for indigenous techniques was probably the best outcome he could hope for. The real validation came on the fourth day, when the storm began to subside and they could venture outside to assess the overall damage. The village had weathered the crisis with typical efficiency, their traditional storm management methods proving entirely adequate for the extreme weather. More importantly, when Seeks the Hidden Path and her advisors visited their camp to check on the survivors' condition, they were visibly impressed with what they found. The aliens had not only maintained their food preservation operations throughout the storm, but had actually improved them under pressure. "Sky people learn fast," the chief observed approvingly, examining their modified smokehouse with obvious professional interest. "Storm teaching is good teacher. You understand now how survival changes with conditions." Through their translation system, she explained that adaptability during crisis was considered one of the highest forms of intelligence in her culture. The ability to maintain essential functions while modifying methods to meet changing conditions was viewed as a sign of true wisdom rather than mere technical competence. The storm's aftermath revealed something else that surprised everyone. Their expanded food preservation capacity had actually generated surplus production. They had more high-quality, preserved food than they could consume even if rescue was delayed for months. This surplus created an opportunity that Marcus had never anticipated. The village had suffered some storm damage to their own food stores, and their traditional preservation methods, while effective, were labor-intensive and required constant attention that storm recovery efforts made difficult. "We could share our surplus," Marcus suggested during their post-storm planning meeting. "Help them recover faster, while demonstrating that our methods can contribute to their community's welfare." The proposal generated immediate enthusiasm from most of the survivors. The cooperative approach that had saved them during the crisis had created genuine bonds with their indigenous hosts. Sharing their success felt like a natural extension of the relationships they had built. Even Dr. Vexhai supported the idea, though she framed it in typically scientific terms. Demonstrating the practical applications of our improved methods would provide valuable data about scalability and adaptation to different population groups. Takor was more direct. Warriors share victory with their battle brothers. These people fought the storm alongside us. They deserve to benefit from our success. When they presented their offer to Seeks the Hidden Path, her response was immediate and emotional. Through gestures and broken words, she conveyed that sharing abundance during recovery time was considered one of the most sacred acts in her culture. Their willingness to give rather than just take marked them as true friends rather than mere temporary guests. As they worked together to distribute preserved food and share preservation techniques with the village, Marcus realized they had achieved something far more significant than simple survival. They had demonstrated that cooperation across species and technological levels could create benefits that exceeded what any group could achieve independently. The approaching rescue ship would find not just survivors, but pioneers who had developed revolutionary new approaches to interstellar cooperation and resource management. Their crash had become a discovery that could change how the galaxy's civilizations related to each other and to the worlds they explored. 3 weeks after the storm, the rescue ship's engines could be heard long before it appeared above the jungle canopy. The deep rumble of fusion drives echoed through the forest, causing flocks of alien birds to take flight in spectacular displays of color and sound. Marcus felt a complex mixture of relief and unexpected sadness as he watched the sleek vessel descend toward their improvised landing site. The survivors had used the post-storm period to perfect their preservation techniques and strengthen their relationships with the village. What had begun as a desperate survival strategy had evolved into a genuine cultural exchange that was transforming everyone involved. Dr. Vexhai stood beside him. Her scales displaying colors that Marcus had learned indicated deep contemplation. "I confess," she said quietly, "that I am reluctant to return to a world where such cooperation would be considered unusual." Her transformation had been perhaps the most remarkable of all. The rigid scientist who had initially dismissed indigenous methods as primitive had become one of their most innovative practitioners. Her technical knowledge, combined with traditional techniques, had produced preservation methods that exceeded anything in the Galactic Council's databases. Takor approached with his characteristic directness, but his bearing showed newfound respect for the methods that had saved his life. "The humans speak truth," he announced. "Strength comes from learning, not from refusing to learn." The rescue ship touched down in a clearing the village had helped them prepare, its anti-gravity systems carefully calibrated to avoid damaging the surrounding ecosystem. Captain Rodriguez, looking remarkably well-fed and healthy for someone who had been stranded for weeks, greeted the rescue team with obvious confidence. "All survivors present and accounted for," he reported to the rescue commander, a stern Centaurian admiral, whose scales immediately shifted to surprised purple when he saw the condition of the supposed castaways. Admiral Thekvar had clearly expected to find desperate refugees barely clinging to life. Instead, he discovered a thriving community that had not only solved their survival challenges, but had actually improved their overall health and capabilities. The preserved foods they had learned to produce were nutritionally superior to standard ship rations. "This is unexpected," the Admiral admitted, studying readings from his medical scanner. "Your vital signs indicate better health than when you departed. How is this possible without proper medical facilities?" Sarah stepped forward, her xenobiology expertise allowing her to explain their discoveries in terms that the rescue team could understand. "We learned food preservation and preparation techniques that optimize nutrient absorption for each species' specific physiology. The methods we developed actually surpass standard space rations in several key areas." The rescue team's chief medical officer, a Cathari scientist named Dr. Zekhun, examined their preserved food samples with obvious fascination. "The protein folding patterns are remarkable," she clicked excitedly. "These techniques could revolutionize deep space nutrition management." But the most significant moment came when Seeks the Hidden Path and her advisors arrived to bid farewell to their sky friends. The village had prepared ceremonial gifts, examples of their finest preserved foods and detailed instructions for replicating their methods on other worlds. Through their now fluent translation system, the chief addressed the rescue team directly. Sky people came to us broken and hungry. Now they leave as teachers and friends. They learned that wisdom has many forms, and that survival requires cooperation, not conquest. Admiral Thekvar listened to this speech with growing astonishment. It was unprecedented for a non-spacefaring species to be treated as equals in diplomatic discourse, especially by members of the Galactic Council. Yet the obvious competence and sophistication of the village's knowledge made such respect seem entirely appropriate. Marcus realized that this moment represented a fundamental shift in how the galaxy's civilizations might relate to indigenous populations. The survivors weren't just returning home, they were carrying proof that technological advancement and traditional knowledge could be combined to create solutions superior to either approach alone. The loading of their equipment and samples onto the rescue ship became an impromptu cultural exhibition. Each preservation unit had to be carefully documented and protected for transport, while the detailed process notes they had developed represented a library of techniques that could benefit countless worlds. Dr. Vexhai personally supervised the transfer of her research data, which contained biochemical analyses that would allow the preservation methods to be adapted for dozens of different alien physiologies. This knowledge must be preserved and shared, she insisted. It represents a revolution in our understanding of nutritional science. Tekor had arranged for several drachmoney hunting tools to be left with the village, along with tactical knowledge that could improve their defensive capabilities. In return, he carried weapons, crafted by village artisans that incorporated design principles his military engineers had never considered. The emotional goodbye between the survivors and their hosts revealed just how deep the bonds had become. What had begun as a desperate alliance for survival had evolved into genuine friendship and mutual respect. Several aliens made formal commitments to return when diplomatic relations could be properly established. Kessitel, whose diplomatic skills had proven essential to their success, had already begun drafting preliminary agreements for ongoing cultural and technological exchange. Her reports would likely reshape how the Galactic Council approached first contact with indigenous civilizations. As the rescue ship lifted off from the jungle clearing, Marcus looked down at the village that had saved them in ways they couldn't have imagined. The smokehouse they had built together still sent thin streams of aromatic smoke into the sky, a symbol of cooperation that transcended species and technological boundaries. The return journey to Council space provided time for reflection and planning. The preserved foods they had brought with them maintained their quality perfectly during the voyage, proving that the techniques could be adapted for space travel. More importantly, the documentation they had assembled represented a complete paradigm shift in approaches to interstellar survival and cooperation. Dr. Vex's spent most of the journey working with the ship's food synthesis systems, demonstrating how traditional preservation principles could be integrated with advanced technology. The results exceeded the performance of standard rations while requiring significantly fewer resources. Tekor used his time to develop tactical applications for the indigenous techniques they had learned. The Drachmani military's interest in self-sufficiency made them ideal candidates for adopting preservation methods that reduced logistical dependencies. The Catharian Luminari representatives collaborated on detailed environmental studies that would allow the techniques to be adapted for different planetary conditions. Their work ensured that the knowledge could benefit exploration missions throughout the galaxy. When they finally reached Council headquarters, their arrival created immediate controversy. News of their unconventional survival methods spread quickly through diplomatic channels, generating intense debate about the implications for established policies regarding primitive worlds. Marcus found himself at the center of discussions that would reshape interstellar relations for generations to come. The simple act of building a smokehouse had revealed fundamental flaws in how advanced civilizations approach survival, cooperation, and the value of indigenous knowledge. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the council chambers as representatives from dozens of worlds debated the Kepler 442b Accords agreements that would establish new protocols for cultural exchange and technology, sharing with non-spacefaring civilizations. The principles they had learned in the jungle were being formalized into galactic law. Dr. Vexhi's research had sparked a revolution in nutritional science that was already saving lives on exploration missions throughout Council space. Takor's tactical innovations had influenced military doctrine across multiple species. Sarah's biological findings had opened new fields of xenobiological research. But perhaps the most important change was harder to quantify. Throughout the galaxy, the rigid barriers between advanced and primitive, technological and traditional, were beginning to dissolve. The survivors of Kepler 442b had proven that intelligence and wisdom could be found in unexpected places, and that sometimes the most sophisticated solution was also the simplest one, as Marcus prepared for his next assignment, leading the first formal, diplomatic mission back to Seeks the Hidden Path's people, he reflected, on the strange journey that had brought them all to this point. Their emergency rations had spoiled in an alien jungle, but in learning to feed themselves, they had discovered how to nourish an entire galaxy's approach to cooperation and survival. The Smokehouse still operated on Kepler 442b, now tended by both villagers and visiting alien scientists who came to learn techniques that their advanced civilizations had forgotten. It stood as a monument to the idea that true progress came not from choosing between old and new, but from Finovery wasn't a Enai's